भाई गँग्स ऑफ वासेपूर कितनी अच्छी मूवी है. क्रेझी आहे आता. तुम्हाला काय वाटतं? आपण आपले नेट झिरो लक्ष्य पूर्ण करू शकतो?
मग आपल्या वीज गरजांबद्दल काय?
Dad, I am finishing my homework essay on coal. Vanita ma'am said coal causes air pollution. Do you think all mining should stop immediately to save the environment?
Hello and welcome to L is for Labor, your source of information for all things labor. This series takes you through the world of work in India. So, coal as a subject has featured in our popular imagination around the world for centuries. As far back as 1854, the book Hard Times by Charles Dickens came out. The book, based on 19th century England, is a harsh critique of the implications of industrialization for the working class. Coal is the central theme of the book. In a fictional place named Coketown, coal is the culprit of creating a polluting environment where, as Dickens describes, nature is strongly bricked out as killing airs and gases are bricked in. Much closer to home, we've had coal feature in our movies over the decades. From the blockbuster hit Kala Patthar, dating to our parents' or grandparents' generation, to the ever-famous Gangs of Wasaipur, still a hot favorite amongst ardent fans of Indian cinema. I was also surprised to learn that the use of coal as a fuel has a history dating back thousands of years. For instance, the explorer and Venetian merchant Marco Polo famously documented the use of coal for heating in the Yuan dynasty in China under Emperor Kublai Khan in the late 1200s, calling it the black stone that burned like wood. The use of coal as a fuel became much more widespread, of course, during the Industrial Revolution in Europe and North America. Coming to recent years, policy discussions have emphasized the urgent need to decarbonize and move away from coal owing to its adverse implications for the environment and due to the climate crisis. But what does it mean for industry to move away from this black stone that Marco Polo once described? Given that our everyday living has been interlinked with it for centuries, more specifically, what does this mean for the working class dependent on the sector? And finally, when we speak of countries like India, can we really describe just transitions in the same way that several global north states do? Let's first have a quick look back at what we learned in our first episode in this Just Transition series.
So coal in India is concentrated on the eastern states in India, mostly Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Telangana, West Bengal to some extent, and also within these states there are certain regions that are entirely dependent on coal. So there are entire districts that have been formed out of coal. Because you have asked, in the context of India, most of the coal mining is also public sector owned, which means that these companies also have obligations, like social obligations, to provide education, healthcare and other basic amenities and basic facilities. If I can recall, I was in a mining district, not coal mining, but it was an iron ore mining district that I was in, and it was being run by a private company. And you see that when the mines are closed, the company moves, and so the schools shut, the hospitals shut, and all of these things happen. So it's like you have these social welfare amenities only till the time the mining exists or the company exists, and then once the company retracts, everything else also goes away.
We also saw in our first episode that just transitions contexts in the global south are typically more complex, since the workforce is exceedingly diverse and may not be unionized. So let's unpack all of this a bit further.
See, I think we need to begin with, in the global north, the nature of labor is significantly different from the nature of labor in the global south. Now, in the global north, labor is very often, there's a far higher degree of formalization, a far higher degree of organization of labor. There are lower levels of contractualization, lower levels of precarity and unemployment and underemployment and so on in coal regions. Now, what happens, what at least I think happens in just transition narratives, is that a template that comes from the global north is often sort of superimposed on the global south. There is an attempt to sort of bring solutions from the global north into the global south, and that's not really going to work because the nature of labor in the global south is so fundamentally different. Now, what's happening in the current just transition framing is that, as you said, one is looking at labor in the energy sector. And then one is, of course, then extrapolating that discussion to say, how can you move workers in the energy sector to working in another energy sector? So how do you skill and train people in the coal and the thermal power sector to work in, say, the renewable energy sector, and so on and so forth? So the discussion is kind of circumscribed within existing academic and policy silos. And I think this is a little counterproductive because it's not quite helping us to understand the nature of laboring and work, especially in the global south. Now, let me give you a sense of how laboring looks like in the global south. In coal regions, in coal-rich districts, of course, coal is the spine of the local economy in the sense that it provides a large part of the money that is sort of holding the economy in these districts together. That is fairly well documented. But I think what we need to understand is that there is a disjunction between the contribution to the local GDP, to the local money that's flowing into these districts, and the contribution to employment and livelihoods. Now, if you look at, say, the top 5 or 6 coal-rich districts in this country, you'll find that coal actually provides for between, at max 20%, 20 to 25% of jobs in these districts. And that is a bit of an exaggeration in many of these districts. Yes, there are, of course, variations. Say, if you have very old coal districts such as Jharia and so on, they happen to have a much higher degree of dependence on the coal economy. But in most coal districts of this country, coal actually does not provide for enough jobs. So the real question is, what are people doing for a livelihood in these districts? And that is where I think we need to focus our attention as of now. Because if we are thinking of a labor solution for transitioning away from coal, we need to start with what are people doing for a livelihood? What is the nature of labor currently in coal districts? So what we see on the ground in many coal districts in this country is this. People are depending on multiple sources to eke out a livelihood. Agrarian, non-agrarian, formal, non-formal, land-based, mine-based, and so on and so on. And I would suggest that, just transitions narratives will have to actually engage with this idea that labor in coal regions is not just industrial labor in and around the coal sector, in the mines, in the thermal power plants, and so on and so forth. It is so much more.
So it is apparent that solutions for just transitions from global north states cannot simply be superimposed in the Indian context. A big reason for this is, of course, our vastly diverse workforce in coal districts, which, as we are seeing, is also not solely linked to coal either. In order to dissect this further, though, let's first take a look at the term informality and what it means. Now, the term informal sector first came about in 1970 and is attributed to Keith Hart, a British anthropologist who had conducted a study on the low-income activities of low-wage migrants from northern Ghana into Accra, who were at the time unable to find wage employment. Over the decades, ideas surrounding informality in the workforce have evolved. This encompasses debates from who comprises the informal economy to what causes this informality. The scholar and development practitioner Dr. Martha Alter-Chen, in a 2012 paper, describes the evolution of 4 key schools of thinking as regards the nature and composition of the informal economy. The paper describes these 4 schools as the dualists, the structuralists, the legalists, and finally, the voluntarists. At a very high level, the dualists thought of the informal sector as comprising marginal economic activities that are quite separate from the formal sector. In the meanwhile, the structuralists described the informal economy mainly as micro-enterprises, where workers, quoting from the paper, serve to reduce input and labor costs and thereby increase the competitiveness of large capitalist firms. The third school was the legalist school, which focuses on legal regimes, as the name suggests. The emphasis here was on the informal sector as, quote, lucky micro-entrepreneurs, opting to operate informally owing to the cumbersome processes of converting their assets into those which are legally recognized. And finally, there were the voluntarists, who also described informal entrepreneurs as opting to stay outside of regulatory frameworks. Unlike the legalists, however, their focus on the causes were not from the cumbersome registration procedures. If we were to take the Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto as an example, he would fall under the legalist school. De Soto strongly opposed the idea that success in many global North capitalist states was based on cultural success, instead proposing that much of their economic success was linked to formal property systems. His core idea was that the informal sector in developing countries was dealing with dead capital, since most of their assets were neither documented nor formalized. Most people from global South states will relate. In all likelihood, someone in your neighborhood, it could be a vendor or a domestic worker, someone you buy fish from, perhaps could not get an ID document or get a proof of address simply to get a bank account. So there is certainly merit to this argument. But the term informal is a very broad term encompassing so many types of work. Therefore, arbitrarily imposing norms around formalization without understanding each context could have adverse effects. While the legalist school is an example, each school of thought has its merits, but falls short of encompassing the entire informal economy. Which is why it is best to rely on the ILO definition of the informal economy. On the one hand, the informal sector looks at the enterprise side. It involves enterprises which are unincorporated. This can take many forms. For instance, they could be run by households. Many are self-employed or own account workers. On the other hand, the other side of informality involves the employment side. This usually refers to jobs that fall outside the realm of social protection and other benefits, as well as outside the ambit of labor laws. As per the ILO definition, these two aspects of the informal sector on the one hand and informal employment on the other are combined to form the informal economy. So when we look at coal and just transitions, all of this is key to remember because our workforce is very diverse. Now let's have a look at what different worker profiles could look like in the Indian coal sector.
I'll give you a couple of snippets of what laboring looks like in the coal sector as of now. Now, you do have permanent workers in the coal sector, and this very small subsection, and I'm going to emphasize this, that this subset of worker is actually a very small subset of laboring in the coal sector. This permanent worker, I'll give you a brief profile. Somebody working in the coal sector for the last 20 or 30 years or possibly even earlier got a job in the coal sector because their family's land was acquired by Coal India or one of its subsidiaries. Typically, this permanent worker is represented by one of the central trade unions or is a union leader himself. And I'm using himself here because most of these workers are men. This is one kind of worker. This worker enjoys job security, enjoys a stable and good salary, enjoys health benefits, housing benefits, and so on and so on. Of course, enjoys pensions, knows that even when they're retired, the family is going to be supported by a significant amount of pension and so on. Now, Jonathan Parry, for instance, refers to industrial workers in the Bhilai steel plant, not in coal or the thermal power sector, as the aristocracy of labor. Something very similar, I would use a very similar phrase to explain the permanent worker in the coal sector. Aristocracy of labor. Somebody who is a small subset of labor in the coal sector but enjoys significant benefits. But the larger world of labor is what we need to focus on. These workers are they're essentially working for several companies, private outsourcing companies who handle small parts of the coal mining activity for subsidiaries of Coal India. They're informal workers, they're temporary workers, they're contractual workers. Typically fairly young, between 20 to 35 years of age. They've lost land, they've got a contractual position in the mines, often as part of a compensation package. And getting this contractual job is also tied to local social and political capital and negotiating power, and therefore plays out very differently in different coal sites. In Jharkhand, for instance, where indigenous groups enjoy a lot more social and political capital compared to indigenous groups, say in Korba or even in the Ape Valley, you find that many of these contractual jobs also can go to young tribal men, and so on and so forth. So there are, of course, ideas, there are, of course, factors around class and ethnicity and so on that play out. But these contractual jobs, even as they remain temporary and insecure and informal, are essentially make up the mainstay of working in the coal sector as of now. And these jobs can go away fairly easily. And I'm suggesting here that it is this worker, this kind of labor, that we need to focus on right now.
One of the best books I read last year was the graphic novel Ducks by Kate Beaton. It is a powerful first-person account of the author's experiences on migrating to Canada's Alberta oil sands as a student just out of university, trying very hard to service her student debt. The book touches upon several universal themes: injustice against women and indigenous groups in mining, alienation after migrating for work to an isolated place, environmental degradation, climate change issues, as well as the struggles of the working class. The book made me wonder about contexts much closer to home as well. What about other questions in the coal sector, such as migrant worker precarity?
I'll give you a sense of a picture that a photograph that I took during one of my visits to Korba. So we were taking this photograph of the mines from outside of the mines, and right in the middle of the mines, literally in the middle of the mining area, the blasting was taking place a couple of kilometers away from this small space. I saw a set of sheds, and I was like, is this a set of sheds that I'm seeing right inside the coal mines? And then I was told by the person I was with, somebody was taking me around the mines, that yes, this is a labor camp, and people, typically migrant workers from outside the state, are put into these shed-like labor camps. They live in these ghettos, for lack of a better term, and they live there for several months at a time. And of course, when the contract ends, they go back home, they try to find other forms of employment. So this is the level of precarity. They live in terrible conditions. They live sort of isolated from local communities with no sense of organization, no sense of solidarity, and so on. And their jobs are, of course, they live in terrible working conditions, and their jobs are hard to do. They're dangerous and dirty.
It is also important to underscore how coal mining is not divorced from the larger socio-political context of each site. This also links to the politics of land dispossession, caste, and tribal identities.
I'll give you a snippet of something that I myself have been witnessing in Korba for a while now. This contractor, labor contractor, is sort of set up a small political party in Chhattisgarh, in Korba in particular. This political party actually works primarily in Korba and nowhere else. The party supported a candidate in the local assembly elections. The candidate, of course, lost given the nature of the two-party political competition in Chhattisgarh. But what I want to flag off here is that this contractor has a fairly big contract with the Southeastern Coalfields Limited, owns and manages a fleet of trucks. And his small office in Korba posts negotiations of all sorts. People come to his office asking for jobs in the coal sector, asking for jobs as, say, drivers in the fleet of trucks, with the fleet of trucks that this person manages, and so on. You have people, truck dealers coming in, offering better deals for new trucks, and so on and so forth. Right. So this is the character this kind of character is increasingly becoming important in coal regions because of the nature of contracting and subcontracting and so on. That it's no longer as simple as it used to be in public sector companies, as in a tender gets released, a you supply your CV, you get interviewed, and so on and so forth. It's a very transparent, very bureaucratic system. What we are seeing in coal regions is that recruitment of labor is not nowhere close to being transparent and bureaucratic. It's deeply connected to social and political ties. It's deeply connected to social and political capital. It's deeply managed by local power brokers, labor contractors, aspiring politicians, and so on and so forth.
So it is apparent that it is imperative for workers to be at the center of just transitions conversations. But all the while remembering their informality means that they may not be part of a union. So what does this mean for the road ahead?
So what I'm suggesting is that one could possibly shift the focus, the sort of the unit of discussion from the coal sector, the coal company, to the district. And if one focuses on the district rather than the industrial unit, which is the coal company or the thermal power plant, one could possibly come up with more fruitful suggestions about how to go ahead with the transitioning process. And there are already certain structural features available with us to think in terms of district planning. For instance, all mineral-rich districts in this country today are covered by district mineral foundations. There are trusts that exist, financial trusts that exist here at the level of every single mineral-rich district in this country, and there's significant amount of money that is available with these district mineral foundations. Apart from that, there's a lot of money that coal companies are pooling into the mine closure process. There's a lot of money that is allocated to the compensatory afforestation process. If we just were to bring together all the funds available with even these three major sources of financing, which is the DMF funds, the CAMPA compensatory afforestation funds, and the mine closure funds, we will have a significant amount of money available for planning for the future for mineral-rich districts, and in this case, coal-rich districts.
From the staggering scale of the climate crisis, as well as the fact that so many workers do not have access to decent work and livelihoods opportunities around the world, it makes the urgency of conversations like these around just transitions all the more apparent. A rather bleak quote from the book Ducks goes, "Everything's ruined. Our lives around our lands are ruined, our water, the air, everything. Their almighty dollar comes first." That's pretty sad. You can't eat money. But as discerning citizens who are concerned about two things, both climate change as well as ensuring that workers still have brighter tomorrows, the thing that we can do is keep centering workers in the context of just transition. And as we learn today, we can remind people that the context of the workforce is seldom unidimensional, and it certainly isn't the case in the context of the Global South.
The migration story.